In this module, we are going to talk about HTML, which is the basic technology that it's used for building web pages. It's one of the front-end technologies that we can learn in this course. So let's start first with what is HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's the main language used to create web pages, or we can say it's the standard to create the standard used to create web pages. As I said, it's one of the front-end technology. You may use like HTML to create text, tables, lists, images, video, audio, forms, all kind of components that you usually see in website. You can most of the time you can use HTML to build these components in your web pages. In the modern web pages, HTML is only for structure the whole website, or let's say HTML is responsible for architecture your website, not for styling. Back in the day, HTML used to have the presentation and the architecture of your web page in the same location, which was in HTML. But in the modern websites, it's completely different. The way, let's say, people or developers use it is they split the presentation from the architecture of the web page. So the architecture for the web page is created by HTML. But when it comes to the presentation or styling your web pages, or in other words, how does your web pages will look like? This is like another rule or a task for CSS, which we're gonna learn in the coming module. Okay, so any web page, it's like consists or it has two main sections. I can say like all the web pages, it has two sections. The first section, which is the head, and the second section, which is the body. So what are the objectives for each one of them? So when you are trying to, let's say, access the web page, you usually send a request to the server, and the server responds back with a front-end technology. So when it comes to the rendering engine, sometimes you need to include some external files such as JavaScript, CSS, or you wanted to have some JavaScript code within your web pages. So in this case, we usually use the head section to give some instructions to the browser how the browser should render this page. So one of the things that we usually see in the head section, which is the title. So the title which shows on, let's say, the title bar on your browser should be located on in the head section. Why? Because when it comes to the rendering, at the time of the rendering, the title will be set at that time. That's why we set it here in the head. In other words, we can say anything that the user don't see, we should have it here in the head section. So let's say if I want to specify some keywords for the web page to make it easy for the search engine to recognize what my web page is talking about, we can include all this stuff in the head. Why? Because the end user don't need to know what kind of or how the search engine will look into your web pages or how it's going to index your web pages. So as I said, the head here, it should contains only the things that the user don't see, because any tag you would use it here or anything you will put it here in the head section, then the user won't be able to see it. So the other part, which is the body, the body of the web page, which is the user, everything the user see should be included in the body section, or should be implemented in the body section. So our focus in this, let's say in this module, on how to build the visual or the basic components of your web pages. Okay, here's the code snippet for the web page architecture. As you can see here, the main section, usually we are using the head tag. Don't worry about tags, we will talk about it later, but for now you should understand that anything you want as a web developer, you want the search engine, or let's say the rendering engine on the browser to read, you should place it here in this area. Anything you want the end user to see, you should place it in the body area. One of the most common stuff that you would usually see, which is the character set, which is like which language this web page is written by. Let's say we have like a Unicode, you have a UTF, you have Windows, what kind of standards that this web page is using. Another one, which is the viewport, which is like this device or this web page designed to be seen on, let's say, a handheld, or let's say in your smartphone, or just a browser, or whatever. Okay. Another thing, which is the title, which usually the user don't see it on the web page, but he can see it on the title bar on the browser. So I mentioned before that like HTML is hypertext markup language, or tag-based language. Okay, but in reality, HTML is not a programming language, and there's a reason for that. It's common for the people to call it as a programming language, but when it comes to reality, no, it's not a programming language. The thing is, with HTML, it doesn't have the main structure of any programming language. As you know, that's like one of the main components in any programming language, which is the logic, let's say if conditions, or repetition controls. All these stuff, it's like one of the characteristics of any programming language. But when it comes to HTML tags, or HTML in general, it doesn't provide any functionality to do some logic or to do some repetition. So for example, if you wanted to build a web page which has, let's say, about 10 lines of text, of the same text, for example, in the normal language, programming language, you would do just a for loop and one print statement. And when you run this, let's say this code, it's going to generate all the 10 lines of statements you wanted to print out. But when it comes to HTML, if you wanted to achieve the same functionality, you would need to have 10 lines written or fixed on any of your web pages. So in this case, we don't have any of the basic programming language structures that we are familiar with, such as repetition, logic, variables, all these stuff. We don't have an HTML language. That's why most of the time we cannot say it's a programming language, but it's a markup language. Okay, so as I said, HTML is known as a tag-based markup language. Okay, what does a tag mean? So to express any, let's say, any functionality you wanted to include in your page, there's a tag specified for such an objective. So for example, if you wanted to include or add an image to your web page, there's a tag that help you to create an image or insert image in your web pages. Okay, in general, there's some let's say rules if you can understand these rules, then HTML tags or HTML in general, it's just like a piece of cake. So one of the main general rules here for HTML is we have something we call it opening and closing tag. So at any point, if you wanted to create a component, let's say an image, there is opening tag and there's closing tag. So as you can say, like we talked about tags, but what is tags in reality? So the tag, it could be represented in this way. So it's less than, then a predefined tag names for specific functionality or for specific feature, then greater than. This is the opening. We can say this is the opening tag. And when it comes to the closing tag, we can say it's using the same thing, but it has this / here, which is donated for the closing tag. In other words, this is when the effects is gonna start, and all the enclosed text here will take the effects of this tag until it's closed off here. So once it's closed, that means the effects on this text here will start from here at the T and will end at the E. Another rule here, which is some tags, it doesn't have a closing tag. Or sometimes you might see like people call it avoid tags. Or another people might say it's a self-closing tag. For example, breakable line, or just like move from a new line in your web pages. Since, like as a rule of thumb here, if you want to create an effect on an element or a text or anything, you would have enclose it by opening and closing tag. But for just creating a new line, there's no start and end for the new line, or there's no start for the effect and end of the effect. It's almost the same thing with the image. You cannot say just like from here, let's say from this area to this area, it's going to be the image. Image is just like one object. You wanted to insert this object, so you don't need like to start and closing. Most of the time, you would see like to view number of tags, that is avoid tags or self-closing tags. In the self-closing tags, usually we would use this way. So less than the tag name, then space, then / and greater than. This is like all the void tags will use the same rule. Okay. So another rule or another important thing to understand about HTML, which is nesting. Nesting means like HTML tags are nested in nature. As you can see here, let's go back here. The HTML tag here is the main, or let's say we can say it's the root tag here, and all the rest here are the children of this tag, right, for HTML. If we can see here, the head is the parent of these children tags. So nesting is the main thing that happens in HTML. So if you wanted to have like multiple or let's say nesting a chain, you can create wherever. It's okay to have unlimited nested tags. Okay, so this is really important to understand that HTML tags are nested in nature. That means any tag may have another children tags, and any children tags might have another children tags, which is like it's gonna be let's say unlimited nesting tags. One rule when it comes to the nested tags to remember is when nesting the tags, you need to close the last open tags. So for example, as you can see here, for example, this one for the title, you started this tag here, and before you create the head or to close the head, you have to create what you last started. So in another word, we can say that nesting tags in HTML is using the implementation of the stack or last in, first out. The last tag you write, the first closing tag you should write next. Okay? So another core components in any HTML web page or any HTML tags, which is attributes. What does attributes do? What does it mean? So HTML uses attributes to characterize how a specific tag will behave or how a specific tag will look like. So any attributes will be included in the opening tag. So does attribute have a general form? And the answer is yes. So the way attributes work is the key here, it's a pair of key and value, or attributes the value of this attribute. So let's say if you wanted to say the border of the table, so we can say the border equal 1. When the rendering engine reads it this way, then it means that when it comes to this table will have a border of 1 pixel in width. Okay? And you can have as many as you want attributes included in the tag name. As you can see here, this is the regular tag name, and then we have the attribute key, and we have like a predefined attributes here. You cannot just like make up your own. It's already defined. Okay, and there's a value for this attribute. If you wanted to include another attribute, then you add here space and another attribute key equal value or the other attribute. So if we say we wanted to include, let's say, the ID of this tag and the style of this tag, then we should write something like ID equal, let's say, number 1, space, then the other one, which is the style. We'll write style equal, we'll add the style that we wanted to apply to this tag. Okay, as you can see, this is like really important for HTML. Back in the day, it was really important to understand the attributes, or there were tons of attributes that we used, because as I said, back in the day, we used to merge or combine the presentation and the structure at the same time. But nowadays, we have like a split of functionality. We have a presentation, which is like CSS is responsible for, and there's HTML, which is responsible for the structure of your web page. So when it comes to the attributes, different attributes or different tags has a different list of attributes. So if we say like I have a component or a tag or a table tag would have some attributes that doesn't work for images, for example. Okay? But there are 3 main attributes that it's maybe used for all the tags, or it's inherited for all the tags that we have. These 3 tag attributes are the ID and the class and the style. Almost all the tags has these three attributes. Okay, so let's say like for the first attribute, which is the ID attribute, it's usually used to assign a unique ID to the tag. According to the standards, each tag should have a unique ID. You cannot have two tags with the same ID. Okay. The other one, which is the class attribute, which is used to apply or to attach a CSS style to this tag. And the last one, which is the style attribute, which is used to add inline style. When we start talking about CSS, we'll understand what's the difference between including or attaching CSS using class or attaching a style using the inline or the style attribute. In addition, there is an attribute called title, where most tags accept, but not all the tags. But as I said, sometimes people tend to call these three attributes as a core attributes. So for the title, some tags support it, or let's say most of the tags have the title attribute, but it's not one of let's say the main or the core attributes that all the tags supported. So the objective or the functionality for this attribute, it's gonna add a text whenever you hover over, let's say, an element or a table or something. A small text will show up. So let me just try. Or I'm gonna let you see it once we get there. Okay. So the question here now, how to get started? Okay. How do I build my first web page? In this case, what you usually need is just like any text editor. For this course, you would usually see me use Visual Studio Code, which is for me works better and really light on my laptop. So if you choose not to use let's say Visual Studio, you might use even Notepad. You can just write your code in your any text editor such as Notepad. Okay. Once you write your code in the file, you have to save the file with the extension of HTML. So let's say if you wanted to create the page module 5, you can name the file as module5.html, okay, or index.html. Once you write and you save this file in your hard disk, then just double click on that hard disk, on that file, and the browser should be able to read it. Okay. So HTML validation. What is HTML validation? When you're creating your web page, you want to make sure that your web page is going to look like or it's going to look the same on all the browsers with different environment. So let's say if my laptop is using Windows and I'm using Microsoft Edge, for example, your website should look the same as any other guy whose operating system is Mac OS, for example, and he's using Safari. So if you write a standard code and you have a validated code, then your code should be or your web page should look like the same on any let's say web page or any browser or any operating system. Okay, so the rule here is once you're done writing your HTML code, you may use this validator here to validate your work to see is there any problem, is there any way or are there any errors in your code or not. Okay, So another important thing, which is not mandatory for you to understand, but it's good. It's gonna help you a lot when you start to work with HTML. So when you are a developer, most of the time you will encounter a terminology which is called cheat sheet, or some people would like to call it a reference sheet. So in HTML, most of the time, you cannot just like memorize all the tags. It's waste of time to memorize all these tags. And instead, you will use one of, let's say, a reference sheet where it has a list of all the tags that you want to use with a simple definition or explanation what this tag would do. So I included for you here this cheat sheet, which is I personally use a lot when I wanted to build like a web application. And instead of just like try to look it up on the internet, I just like go and search for the tag that I wanted to create, and I will see like how does it work, and that's it. Okay. If you don't like this cheat sheet, then you can look up your own on Google, and you might use HTML cheat sheet. And by the way, when like this is, as I said, a general term, when it comes to the development, if you want to see, let's say, CSS cheat sheet, then you can just like replace HTML with CSS, or you can just do JavaScript cheat sheet, and you will find a list or a bunch of references that you may use. So the rule here is do not memorize tags all the time. No developers, no one is memorizing all the tags. You might get it or stuck in your mind by the practice, but no one, almost like no one, is memorizing all the tags, all the rules, or let's say even like with CSS, there's no way that someone can memorize everything, because these things, it's not easy to memorize. Okay, and it's waste of time if you try to memorize it. So HTML components. Most of the time when you are visiting like any web page, what would you usually see in these web pages? You would usually see like text, images, links, lists, tables, forms, multimedia, video or audio. These are the things that you would usually encounter when you are visiting a web site. So here, let's try to cover all these components and how to build it or to include it in your web page. Let's start with HTML text. As you can say, all the websites right now we are visiting, at least it should have like a sentence, or it should have some text. The most common, the HTML text is like the most components used on the web. An example for these text components, the normal text, let's say a paragraph or code snippets or headings for the web page. So to include a paragraph in your web page, you might use the tag P, as you can see here. Most of the time, you would have like a P opening tag and P closing tag. And all the text that you want to include in this paragraph, you will put between these opening and closing tag. Sometimes, if you don't want to use a paragraph, there's another option which we use usually like with C, which is div, which is a container, or most of the time we can call it as a container layer. Okay, so if you want to use P or div, it's gonna like give you the same results, but the only difference here, which is P is just built to have text inside it. Okay, but when it comes to the div, most of the time you can just like create anything inside it. Okay, so in some cases you want to have like an inline text, not just like a paragraph. In this case, if you need to add inline text, then you should use span. Okay. HTML made it easy to show a pre-formatted text, such as code or a specific, let's say, a paragraph or a specific style for the code. So there's a tag, it's called a pre here, which is donated for pre-formatted text, or even you can insert code and you may use the code tag. Another important part of any text, which is the headings, and HTML comes with 6 types of headings. It starts from the largest, which is H1, and the smallest, which is H6. So the last thing about text here, which is HTML entities. I will like, I just like want to include all these stuff, then we will see an example here. But for now, I need you to understand what does HTML entities mean. So in some cases, you want to include a special characters as part of your text, or you want to show some special characters, such as, let's say, less than or greater than. You know that less than and greater than has a special meaning for HTML, which is donated for opening tag or closing tag. This is like why it's used. If you want to include it and without like, let's say, deal with it as an opening tag or a special character, you may use the entities. Okay. Let me show you here in the example, how does it work? So here, as you can see, the output of this one or this line is this line here, as you can see. If I wrote this line here as less than and greater than, then the rendering engine or the browser will deal with it as a tag. But in my case here, I don't want to deal with it as a tag. I just want to show it on the screen or on the browser web page. So I don't want to work with it as a tag. Okay. So here are like the list of the text that we used or we mentioned here or we discussed. As you can see, H1, as you can see the size of H1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you wanted to include like a paragraph, then you can use a P tag. If you want to include a span, you can see here, this is span. And the thing or the difference here is in P, it's going to deal with it as a paragraph. So once it ends here, then it's going to create a new line by default. But when we say, like when we are working with span, that means it's not going to include a new line at the end. So P and div will have the same functionality in this case. Most of the time, it's going to create a paragraph, and at the end of the paragraph, it's going to add a new line. But when it comes to span is going to just like add the text without the new line at the end. Okay? And for HTML entities, there is, as I said, a list of entities that you may see here. And on this link, if you visit this link, you can see a list of all the entities that you can write. But generally speaking, most of the time, you will have something like this. You will have an int symbol here, then the name of the entity, and it ends with a semicolon here. So in this case here, and symbol less than, this is like the symbol or the icon that you wanted to include in your code. Okay, so this was like the first part of, or let's say the first component that we usually see on the web page. Another main component or another, let's say, thing that we see on the web pages, which is the images. As you may know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Most of the time, instead of just like writing one page of text, just like showing one image might like give you an idea better than just like wasting your time just reading the whole thing to get the same knowledge from showing just like one image. Okay. In the image, to insert or to add an image to your web page, we may use the tag image. The tag img is a self-closing or a void tag, which means it doesn't need a closing tag. It's a self-closing tag. So in this case, you would see the way that we write the tag for including the image. It's going to be img, then space forward, then greater than symbol here. For this tag to be able to function in the right way, one main attributes should be included, which is src. So src is used to define what is the image that you wanted to include in your web page. So in other words, src is where the image that you wanted to include is located. So as I said, like src is used to define the location or determine the location where this image is located or stored. There's three ways that we can write src. The first one is using absolute path, which is the location of the image on your server starting from the root. As you may recall from like the second module, when we talked about there's a specific storage area for any web browser, and we said like this specific area, we call it the root of let's say the storage area of this web browser. Okay, so one of them is to use the absolute path starting from the root to the image, and another one which is using a relative path, which like the location of this image will start from the location of the file you are visiting, and we will see it in a bit. The last one, which is using a link on the web. If you upload your image to a different server here, then you might take this link and include it as a location for the image you wanted to include. Okay, so there's some optional. Most of the time it's good to include it in your HTML, which is the title and the alternative or ALT and width and height. So what does these things mean? The first one, the title, which is like when you are hover over, let's say the image, a small text will like show some of the explanation. So ALT, which is an alternative text in case the image is not found, then there's like a specific text will be shown instead of just like showing the image. And the last but not least, width and the height, or like the size of, or let's say the dimension of the image. Most of the time it's going to be in pixel. So these are like some of the examples here. As you can see, the first one, I'm using the relative path, which is the location or where I should find the image from my current file. in this case, I will go to the directory images, then I will use image PNG. The other one, which is src here, I'm using the website. So the location of the file is on a different server, and as you can see, it just like includes everything. One more thing here, which is the title. As you can see here, title will be will show when hovering. Here, I'm just like taking an image. As you can see, this is the title. So at any point, if you see like the attribute title, this is how it will look like. Okay. So the last thing here, which is I like intentionally just like mistype the name of the image here to not be able to include it. So I included here the attributes alt, which is gonna show in case the image is not found, this text will be shown instead. So this text here, you can just like write whatever. You can just like image not found or the name of the image. You can just like do whatever you want. But the most important part here is to understand that ALT or alternative is used to show a text in case the image is not found. Okay? So another important component in HTML, which is the links. Most of the time, you will move from one page to another, or you will find like one information or the information on one page. Then if you wanted to get more information or wanted to navigate to another type or category of information, then you will click a link. So in reality, let's say the link are the heart of any web page. You cannot just like have a web page without any link. Almost like all the web pages should have at least one link. Okay, the tag used to links pages is anchor, or its name is A, stands for anchor. There are two types of links. One of them, which is like internal link, which is gonna link to a section in your web page, and another one which is external link, which is gonna navigate you from one document to another document, no matter like the document reside on your web server or on a different server. But the thing here to distinguish between the internal link and the external link, the difference here is whether the navigation within the same document or to the different document. If it's like the navigation within the same document, then we call it internal link. If we are navigating to a different document, then we call it external link. So there is like some attributes which is like mainly specified for the anchor tag. The main attribute for this tag, which is hyperreference, or let's say the location of the web page or the document that you wanted to navigate to. Okay. Another optional attribute, which is the target, which is gonna decide the behavior of the opening of the link. So if you have a link and you wanted to like open the link in a new tab, for example, then you may use target to let's say apply this behavior. The default behavior is like this link will open in the same web page or in the same window. So here's the example, some of the example. So here, as you can see here, A, which is the anchor, then the hyperreference, and this is the website that you wanted to visit, which is here, google.com. And between the opening tag and the closing tag, this is what like the user would see as a text. This location here, or this content here in this area, you might have text, or you can have an image, as you see here. You can see here the image is replaced of the text. So instead of just writing a text, I just like wrote here, or I just include an image. Okay. So as I said, you might link to a different page, or let's say a different location, or if you write it this way, that means you are trying to navigate to a document on the same server. And this is like the main difference. If you see like this link is linked to another HTTP, which is not part of your web server, that means you're trying to navigate to external document. Here, in this example, you also trying to navigate to a different document, but this different document reside on your server, so it's still in your area. The last one here, which is like click here to move to section 1. As you can see, this one here. The difference here between this one and these two are the hash symbol here. Most of the time, if you want to navigate or to do an internal link, then you should include this hashtag, then the name of the section. So here I added just like the section with the ID attribute for that tag. So the way it's working, you are trying to link from this area here to the section area. Most of the time, you will see it like when you have like a very long web page and you want to move from one section to another, you should write it in this way. So the way you do it, you will define the sections. The definition of these sections should be determined by the ID. And when you want to create a link, then you would use the hashtag and then the name of the ID, which should match with what you have on the section that you want to navigate to. Okay, and as I said, the content or what you would usually see, either you can like have a link as an image, or you can have it as a text. It's up to you and up to the requirements you have. So another common components that you would usually see, which is the lists. So HTML provides us with like 3 types of list. Either we have an ordered list, or an ordered list, or a definitions list. So the ordered list, which usually like you can tell it's 1, 2, 3, etc. And for this one, for this type of list, we would usually use OL, or stands for ordered list. If we wanted to include an ordered list, which is a bullet point list, then we would use UL tag. The last type of the list, which is the definition list, usually I would use DL tags. As you can see, it's definition list. To include an items in either in the ordered list or in the ordered list, an ordered list, would usually use the tag of LI, as we will see in a bit. But for now, it's like for each item you wanted to include in either these two, you would use li. Okay, but when it comes to the definition list, it has two main parameters. The first one, which is the term that you want to define. Usually you will like define the term using dt, which is definition term. And the definition that you wanted to show for this term, which is added as a dd, or definition. Yeah, it's just like duplicated. So for HTML ordered list, as you would see here on the right, this is like the first item, and this is the second item. And as you can see, there's a sub item here, or sub list, which is you can use. Most of the time, you can say like you may have ordered list, and the sub list you might have some unordered list. It's up to you. You can just create it. So the way it's working here is, as you can see here, this is the ordered list tag, and this is like the first item. As I told you before, li is used to define or insert a list item. So after the second, if you wanted to create a sub list, then you have the choice either to use another OL if you want to have an ordered list, or you might use an ordered list if you choose to use a bullet list. And as you can see here, if you want to create an ordered list, it's almost the same code. I just like replaced or change OL to UL, and that's it. As you can see, the results here are for an ordered list or a bullet point. So for a definition list, as you can see, this is the term, and this is the definition of the term 1. And the same here with term 2, and this is the definition of the term 2. Most of the time, you would see this kind of list in a dictionary, where you have like, this is like a word, and this is the definition of the word. Okay, so to define a definition list, you will start with DL. Then most of the time you have to have like DT, then DD. In some cases, if you wanted to have like multiple terms with the same definition, then you might create DT, another DT, a third DT. Then after you finish to list like all these terminology, which is going to have the same, all these, let's say 3 terminologies you have, it's going to have the same definition, then you can define DD. So it's important for you here to understand that to define a term in your list, you would use DT, and to define, or let's say to include the definition for a specific term, then you would use DD. And the order here matters. So if you have like 3 or 4 DTs, and after, like on the 4th or 5th line you included DD, that means you will have like 3 or 4 terminologies, then just like one definition for all these 4 or 3 terminologies you have. So another important components that we usually use heavily in creating web pages, which is HTML tables. So HTML tables, or in general, the table is nothing but a group of rows and columns. So to create a table, as like you may conclude, we can just like use the tag table. And to create a row in this table, you would use TR, which stands for table row. And to to include a column or a cell in a row, you have to use TD. In some cases, like most of the time, you would need to do some merging. When you say merge, either to merge columns together or to merge row together. Therefore, you would use, like if you wanted to do a row merge, then you would usually use a row span. And if you wanted to do a column merge, you would use a col span. And you will define this merge. It's gonna like last for how many rows or for how many columns, as we would see. So as you can see in this like table here, this table is 4 or 5. This table is 5 rows, and as you can see, the maximum or the number of columns is 3, right? As you can see here, table, this is like the start of the table, and this is at line 31, this is the end of the table. So the first row here, as you can see, it has 3 cells or 3 columns, which is cell 1, 2, and 3. So for the second line or for the second row, I wanted to merge all these 3 cells into just one. Therefore, I used col span 3. And here, 3 means how many columns that I'm gonna merge together. Okay? So for the third row, I did merge for 2 columns, which here, as you can see, col span 2. That means I just like merged these 2 into one column. And this is like the last column in that row. Another row here, which is like the way that row merge working. So here, as you can see, I merged, or this cell is a result of merging 2 rows together. So therefore, I did row span 2. That means 2 cell merge, or 2 rows here would be merged together. And this is like really important when you want to do a row span. So you have to create, like if you take out the last row, then you will not be able to see the effects of row span, because this here, this merge should face these 2 rows to be able to see the effects. For this one, you have to practice to try to do it your own, to understand and play with it, to understand what's going on under the hood. Another important component in HTML, which is the form. Almost like all of you as students, at least you've dealt with the forms at least once during your study at UNCC. So the way it's like working, forms give you the ability to the end user to interact with the system or your web page. So any dynamic web page, most of the time you will like use one of the forms to facilitate the interaction between the end user and your system. And forms are the most common method that you may use to facilitate that. A form is a group of elements, which is in this case inputs to your system. These inputs, the end user will be using these inputs to type in or enter his information before it's been like sent to the end or to the back end system. When you are working with the forms, there are 2 main forms attributes that you have to understand why it's working and why it's included. The first one, which is action. In the action attribute, we would usually define where your data, the data as a user, the data you are typing in the form, where this data will be sent to. So the other attribute, which is the method, which defines what is the method. As like you recall from HTTP, we said like when you are trying to send a request, you are using verbs or method. The most common one was like get and post. Most of the time when you want to post or submit some forms, you would usually post. Okay, and once we start like to interact with the backend, we will have like really practice on this one for sure. But at this point, it's important for you to understand and to remember that these two attributes is really important for you to understand. The action defines where your data will be sent, and the method defines the HTTP sending method or the verb that's it's going to be used for this form to be sent to the server. So, as I said, like the form is a group of elements or group of inputs. For each element of these inputs, there are three main attributes that you should understand and you should know how it's working, how, let's say, to work with. So the first attribute, which is the type. The type usually defines the type of the input. Is the input element, do you want it to have like to accept a text, or you want it to upload file, or you want it to have like a password, for example, or if you wanted to do like, let's say, a drop down list, for example, or drop down menu. Another one, which is really important, which is the name. It defines the name of the elements that will be used extensively when working with the backend. So when you're sending your data from the front end to the backend should have a way to understand like, or to see, let's say, the content of that specific input. So if you have a form which is has like a username and password, okay, when you click in the button which is like login, this data will be sent to the backend. How the backend code will differentiate or distinguish between or decide which one is the password and which one is the username. In this case, it's going to be using the name. Okay. The last attribute, which is the value, which defines the value assigned to the element. So if you wanted to access to the value to, or let's say the entered value in this input type, then the value attribute is the one that you're going to use. So HTML5, which is like the latest version that we are using these days to build a web applications or the web pages, provide more inputs. Back in the days, we like used to have like really limited types of inputs, but for HTML5 it offers like more inputs. For example, color picker, dates, email, month, specific number, telephone number, range, to have like a slider, or to have like an input as a search, or if you wanted to have like a time, for example. All these stuff, it's a new inputs for HTML5. For you as a student, it's important to practice all these things together it's not that hard to do a practice on it. So this is like just like a snippet of code that you may see here. As you can see, the first one here, which is the username. As you can see, the type is text. When we define the name text, that means everything you write is going to look like, let's say it's going to look as you can see it. Or sometimes some people will see like what you see is what you get. Okay? So if you can see here, the value, enter your text here, which is going to be almost the same thing. So the content or the assigned content for the input could be assigned by the value. Okay? The password here, which is the type, is the password. There's another input type, which is usually we call it text area, which most of the time the text box here or the text input usually used for one line entry. But if you wanted to allow the user to have like more than one line of entries, then you might use the text area. So the text area, usually it comes with two parameters or two attributes that you may use. One of them, which is rows, it like defined the height, and the columns, it defines the width of your entry. Okay, so another important part, which is the checkbox. So in most cases, the checkbox here, it allows you to choose at least one or more inputs. And as you can see here, we have 3 inputs. It has the name of checkbox with different names and different values. Okay? And once we start to work on the project, we will have like a really solid examples on how you should use it this way. Another important input type, which is the radio. So in the radio button here, you have the option to choose one of the options. Most of the time, you would usually see it like in, let's say, in the exams, when you have a multiple choice exam, and you would choose one of 4 answers. If the instructor wants you to choose, let's say, 2 answers, then he would have used the checkbox. But if he wants to just like force you to choose just one choice, then usually he would use radio button here. So another input type, which is the select or a drop down menu here. Most of the time, or select menu, like to be more precise. In the select, if you click on the select here, you will see all these options. You may predefine which option to be selected by default using the selected attributes for the option. So in the select here menu, to define the options included in the select menu, you would use the option tag. And to specify or to say, let's say, define one default value in these options, you may use selected. And by the way, if you want to use like the default on checkbox and the radio, you may use checked. Okay? Another important input type, which is like we're going to use in one of the milestones, which is the file upload, which allow the user to upload files from his local device to your web server. Another important part or another important input, which is the submit. Here, as you can see, click here to submit. Most of the time, when you click on this button here, your data all the entries here will be posted to the file defined in the action. Okay, so there's another type of buttons here, which is reset. You reset here. When you click on the reset, you already like filled out all this information. And if you want to start all over, then you might click on reset. So reset button here is used to clear all the entries or all the inputs on this form after you like already typed in something. So here the last one, which is like the input type dates, which is one of the new features added by HTML5. As you can see, I already added like here just like the dates to be able to see how does it work. So in this case, if you wanted to practice, let's say, the color, or if you wanted to practice the email, you may use the same thing. And by the way, since the input type here, like the differences here is only use the type, so all the names and the values should apply in here too. Last but not least, which is like video or audio, or in other words, multimedia. HTML5 provides a new API to include video or audio to your web page. Back in the day, it was really tough to include a web page, like a video or audio to your web pages. But with using HTML5, it's really super easy. We are using the video tag, and within this video tag, we use the source tag to define where is the location or the source file that you wanted to play. Okay. There's another important attribute here, which is the type, which defines the MIME or the mem type that you should have. Okay, or what kind of file this is. So if you have like MP4, then you will find like ME type, which is video MP4. If you have like, let's say, AVI, then you will have video AVI. It depends on the mem type that you have. For the audio, you might use like the same thing. As you can see here, there's a controls, which means you wanted to show the audio or the video and include the controls so the end user can control whether to stop or play, or let's say fast forward or backward or do whatever on your components. So the same thing, and this is just like video, you are using audio. The same thing with the source. Usually you would use where is this file is located and what is the type of this file. HTML5, it's not that like different from HTML4 in terms of the tags. So most of the time, all the tags that you are familiar with, like let's say from a previous versions such as like HTML4 or XHTML, all these tags should be working fine with HTML5. But in HTML5, they add a new semantic tags. When we say semantic, that means like when you just like read it, you can understand what's like the objective of this, let's say, tag. So for example, if you wanted to define a header, and by the way, this is like how you should do, let's say, the milestones you have, which is you should include the header, the navigation, section, all this stuff, which is, as you can see, just like from the reading of the name of the tag, you can understand, okay, this is like the header section. You can understand like this is like the footer section. You can understand this is like a side section. You can understand that this is a navigation section. Okay, So at the end of this module, here's like some advice for you to practice. If you want to master HTML, it's like any other technology. If you don't do it, you won't be able to grasp all the content or all the knowledge that you want to acquire. So how to master HTML? A practice. Everything that we showed here, try to practice and include all your practices on the branch that you have on GitHub. This way, I'm gonna like evaluate you in terms of exercise. I didn't want to just like give you an exercise, and instead I just give you like the full option where you can just like practice while you are learning, because this is the only way that you can learn. Once you feel okay, you feel confident that you are familiar with all the concepts that I already explained here, then you can just like start to work on the milestone you have. Another thing which is really important for you as a students during your journey of learning a new technology, which is if you come across to a tag, for example, here in our example as HTML, if you don't know, try to play with it. Try to see how does it work in action. Just like open your editor, type these, let's say, these tags, and see the effects of these tags. This way, you will understand what's going on when you should use it. Most of the time, if you see just like one tag and you do it just once, you will not be able, like, let's say, to master it at first, but most of the time you will understand even without any needs to read some material. How does this tag work, or what's the objective of this tag? Finally, a cheat or reference sheet is really important for you as a developer. Back in the day when I used like to do some front-end technologies, I used to have like I print out this reference sheet and put it on my desk. So whenever I wanted to create, let's say, for example, I wanted to include a video, and I totally forgot about the video. I have no idea how does it work. Then I just like all I need is just like read in my reference sheet and see like what is the right way to include these video or audio into your web pages. That's all for this module. I will see you on the next module. Thank you.